The NFL season starts next week. Super excited. Unfortunately, I won't be playing any fantasy football, and I'm going to tell you why. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Lip. Here we go. It's once again another episode of The Lip here on this great YouTube channel at Phil the Lip. And today I'm going to bring to you the story of why I no longer play fantasy football. It's, to me, very interesting and intriguing, and at the same time sad and stupid. But it is what it is. I think that it's got to be told because I find it to be just a tragedy because football is such a great sport. And when I did try to play fantasy football and basketball, I had a lot of fun. It's just, it seemed like for me the party was very short lived, and I really didn't get to enjoy very much of it. Don't get me wrong, I was able to do some stuff, and I never won my league in either one. Part of the reason why I never won my league is part of the reason why I don't play. And it's not because of being a sore loser, it's just because, well, we're going to get into that. Speaking of getting into things, the background you see on this episode is called Rex, a one-of-one piece that I created, which will eventually be for sale somewhere down the road. Why do I call it Rex? The simple, very simple explanation is I didn't feel like making squares. It doesn't make any sense right now, but as I start showing you more and more of my art, you'll understand. I just didn't feel like making any squares, and I chose to make rectangles, and thus this one's called Rex. Enough of that, though. I've also decided that I'm about to come up with a new segment. And this episode actually is the reason why I'm coming up with this new segment. Can you imagine how long this new segment's going to last? Well, I'll tell you. It's going to last a minimum of from September 5th until January 5th, the NFL regular season. But it'll also go on and extend into the playoffs if I have enough mental fortitude to continue on with it. Essentially, it's going to be my picks for the week. Yeah, I know, my show comes out on Saturday, so I might be a week behind, but I'm telling you right here, right now, I'm going to give you my picks and the picks of the week after that, and it's gonna be interesting. You're gonna like it, I hope. More so, for me personally, I hope that I'm fairly accurate. I have a thought process of how I expect to do, and I think that I should be around 55%, which is not the best on picks. But as the season progresses, things change. Players get hurt. Teams get hot. So I'm going to take that all into account when I start making my picks after around week 9. Things are probably going to change. Some of the teams that I might be up on are probably going to be on the decline. And just maybe some of those teams that were thought to be terrible may actually be on the rise. So some of my picks may change based on what I see, and that's pretty much how everybody does it for the most part. So hopefully I get better than that 55% that I'm looking for. And here it comes. It's time for fill in the blanks. The blank that I'm going to fill in today is what has been missing from my life since February's Super Bowl loss. The answer is very simple. Football itself has been missing since the 49ers Super Bowl loss. And that blank is going to be filled in September 5th Football's coming back. Once again, what has been missing from my life since the 49ers lost the Super Bowl? And once again, the blank gets filled in by football is now returning. Can't wait. Super excited. Now, we're about to start talking about the big stuff. It's the main event coming up, and I think that this main event is one that, well, truthfully, I never actually even intended on doing a show about this. I think maybe, if my memory serves me correct, I might have broached the subject once or twice, and I barely even remember that I did it, because it was just touched upon. Might have been something I put out there in one of my Fact or Fiction episodes, maybe a story, most likely a Fact or Fiction, something that was quick and just didn't touch on it a whole lot. But I think that today, as I'm recording on August 30th, which just so happens to be a friend of mine's birthday, the greatest cashier of all time, Sarah, happy birthday. And at the same time, remember, it's also the same day, 19 years ago, that I destroyed my ankle while showing you where not to sweep in the parking lot at Wawa. That was just great. Well, actually, it was a bit of a nightmare because the surgery and the rehab took me months, and mentally, I probably didn't get over that injury until 2016-ish, when I hurt myself in 2005. But anyway, happy birthday, Miss Sarah, the greatest cashier of all time. If there was a Hall of Fame for being a cashier, you would be in it. In fact, if they started a Hall of Fame for cashiers, you would be the first inductee. You were that great. Now, back to the subject at hand. Fantasy football. Had to pause for a second because this is a bit of a sore subject, but at the same time, it's a subject that is interesting. Personally, I was not someone who was the most internet savvy during the time of fantasy football when it originally started becoming majorly popular. In fact, the first time that I really even put it on my radar was in 2011 when I was working at Pep Boys, and one of the service writers who was there was really, really into fantasy football. Unfortunately, he is a devout Eagles fan, but nonetheless, nobody can be perfect, right? But he was really deep into fantasy football. He had about 4 different teams that he was running in 4 different leagues, and the first time I realized that it was something of interest was when he came into the shop in the back, and he was holding his phone real close, and he was pacing back and forth because he was contemplating a trade offer that somebody had given him. I was noticing that he was pacing back and forth, first of all, and I asked him, was something wrong? Did something go wrong up front? And that's when he told me that he was just trying to decide about this trade. Now, granted, it's been over 10 years. I don't remember what the trade was, but I do remember him talking to me about it, and I remember the gist of the conversation was it was for the most coveted possible position in fantasy sports at the time. It was over a running back and a quarterback. And and he had the quarterback, and he was being offered a very, very good running back. I don't remember what he did in the situation, but I do remember that it was definitely a situation. He had, I think it was 2 days in order to determine whether he was going to make the trade. And for both of those days, he was really pacing back and forth, considering what to do. And I was like, man, this is pretty intense. I wonder how this is going to work out. Now, at this point, it was a couple weeks into the football season, and I don't like to start things in between. So I started looking into some fantasy sports, and I noticed, oh, there's fantasy basketball too. Season hadn't started yet, so I said, well, I'm not the most astute in basketball, but I do know some things. Now, let me give this a try. I'll do football next year. And so I decided to go ahead and give it a shot. In the process of giving it that shot, I found myself a fantasy basketball league, and I went to work. I started putting together a team. It's a fairly decent team, and I felt good about myself. Now, for my cousin David, who most recently, a couple days ago, asked me to join his fantasy league, I had to decline because it all actually started with that basketball team, and then it just never got any better. So, Dave, I need to let you know that the problem of why I really didn't want to join the fantasy football league that you had is because of my retirement from fantasy sports. It all started back in 2011 when I created this fantasy basketball team. And trust me when I tell you that it was a hurt piece. It really was, because I had a pretty good team. A really pretty good team. And just to give you a couple of the names who were on my team, I had Dirk Nowitzki. I had Chris Paul. I was able to steal LeBron James. And believe it or not, was it that year or was it year before that? It was one of those 2 years. I ended up getting a Kevin Durant and a Blake Griffin. Don't quote me on it if it was 2011 or 2012. But I had those guys on my team. High scorers, big time assist guy, Chris Paul. I had a good team in that 2011-2012 season. It was a really good team. And I was doing pretty good. I was actually in second place in my league. And I was feeling myself. And then the situation began. One of my first issues with fantasy football that I really didn't fully understand. And that was, if you're in an area that has internet issues, you're gonna have a problem. And boy, did I have a problem. This first year, I was just not happy because in the process of moving from an apartment to the house, we had some trouble getting the internet back properly, and most of the internet then was just simply coming through our phones, and my team was in the home computer, and I had such an issue trying to get it back that I was unable to make adjustments to my team, and needless to say, my second place turned into a dismal third to last. My basketball team, even though I had Kevin Durant and Dirk Nowitzki, just if they're not playing on certain weeks, they can't help you. And that's what ended up happening. Some massive internet trouble caused me to just lose a very significant portion of games, and it was a nightmare. It was absolutely a nightmare. At that point, I was like, 2012 is officially coming up now, and we're at a steady spot. The internet is flowing. We're going to do this again. And this time, I'm going to do a football team as well. Now I'm feeling even more confident because, well, football is my game. If you know, that's my favorite sport. It's the one that I pay the most attention to. So I expect to do much better in football than I did in basketball. Well, my football team had some players. I ended up finding myself with a very good combination, but at the same time, it's only a good combination if you're able to utilize them properly. I had Matthew Stafford as my quarterback. I had Drew Brees as a quarterback. And I also had Calvin Johnson, Megatron, as one of my wide receivers that year. My goodness. Just think about it. You have a guy who is a strong-arm quarterback who's going to throw for 5,000 yards, and a wide receiver who is a Hall of Famer with a shortened career, but man, he was probably one of the best receivers who has ever lived. And he's getting the passes thrown to him by my quarterback. I picked up him and the quarterback. So every week that they played together, I guaranteed having my quarterback and my wide receiver being really, really, really high in fantasy points. And sure enough, that's what happened. That same year, I was able to get Chris Paul again because I just love having that true point guard. And in my opinion, Chris Paul is the last of the true point guards. The guy who is a true distributor, and he thinks of making sure that he can find the open man, and he will rack up the assists. And like I said, I believe he's the last true point guard, and we're never going to see another point guard in that type of her again. Chris Paul's the last one. And wouldn't you know, I was able to yet again make a steal for a couple of pretty good players. I was able to get second pick in the draft, and 2011, second pick in the draft. Let me just tell you how there was a certain guy from Los Angeles that I picked up to go along with Chris Paul. It was a very good pick. I'm not even going to have to say who that pick was. Just know that it was 2012, and I got that guy. That guy. And I put together another Dirk Nowitzki. Don't know why people slept on that man. 7 foot tall, could hit threes from the locker room. I don't get it. But it was a fairly strong fairly impressive basketball team again that I had. And I felt really good about that team, especially the football team, because, man, I had Stafford and I had Breeze as my quarterbacks. Like, how lucky could you have gotten to have gotten that? I mean, granted, I was a 49er fan 2012. I had to go with a bunch of 49ers because, man, I just thought that they were a good team. And obviously, in the 2012 season was their Super Bowl year that they lost to the Ravens. So having Frank Gore and having Michael Crabtree and Vernon Davis as tight end was a good thing because Colin Kaepernick was able to put some passes together and make it work, and having the 49er defense, which was really vaunted, Patrick Willis, Hall of Famer, man. Hall of Fame. It's a strong defense. Justin Smith, the Cowboy, and just wouldn't stop. Wouldn't get 30 sacks, but he'll get you. That's what Aldon Smith was for, who had his issues, but he also had 19 and a half sacks. So I'm not going to complain about it. That defense was strong. That offense was solid. And I had Megatron and Matthew Stafford. Then it happened again. Internet trouble. The internet killed me. Just absolutely killed me. And when did it kill me? The worst possible time. The Lions week off. So, of course, I had just enough time to make sure that Calvin Johnson and Matthew Stafford were on my bench because they weren't playing. So they weren't going to help me. Then, down goes the internet. Wasn't quite the fiber optic internet that we have today. The all the beautiful stuff where everything's just beamed into your house. No. It was all through the cable lines and just a nightmare. Yes, how did that happen? Well, turned out that the house that we lived in had our lines out back, and they're somewhat low. And, of course, because they were just low enough, the garbage truck would drive by and it would snag the phone lines. Now, typically, at that point in time, it didn't really matter, except for the fact that we needed a landline for reasons I won't discuss at the moment. But it also took out our internet. And man, the garbage truck would go by and it would take that line down every couple weeks. And it would take the phone company forever to come out and repair it. And the silliest thing is, one day I actually looked out the back as the garbage truck knocked over the phone line one day. And the guy on the outside who was throwing the garbage into the truck went to the guy who was driving the truck and he said, "Hey, the line went down." Guy in the truck said, well, they'll call somebody. And they just kept on going. And I just, it just blew my mind. But it also blew my fantasy football season too. Because we're talking 4 weeks without Megatron normally. But when it came back, the damage was already done. Didn't have him for that week and didn't have him for the 4 following weeks. And he was on a tear, of course. Matthew Stafford was slinging the ball for what felt like 10 million yards. And my team, who had some of the best players on it, just didn't even make the playoffs that year. And so I decided to take a hiatus. From 2012, I didn't even sniff fantasy football again until I guess it was a while. When was it? 2017, something like that. Around the time when I started becoming a corrections officer. And boy, found a couple good leagues. And I said, okay, I'm going to try this one. And for about 3 years there, I played, and I got some decent players from time to time. I had Brady. I got Christian McCaffrey. Had some players. I did. Had Gronk for a season somewhere in that neighborhood. Had some good players. But I just was lackadaisical because I was waiting for the collapse to happen. And I didn't play as aggressively as I should have. I didn't trade when people were offering me stuff that might have helped. And I just was playing just to kind of play, but I wasn't really focusing on it like I had when I was really deeply into it mentally. And I just was having really bad times, and I made the playoffs twice in a couple of years, and had the one season I was actually in like second or third place and made the playoffs and got eliminated in the first round. It's just matchups. I mean, what are you going to do? I was not happy about it, and at the time, I was really trying, but not trying. Then 2018, I was a little more aggressive, and I cannot remember for the life of me some of the players I had on that team, but I do remember the reason why that season ended for me, and it ended pretty abruptly. I had a weird issue with my phone because at that point in time, we didn't have a home computer, and all of my fantasy sports was going through my phone. And I was having some phone issues. And those phone issues, of course, had made it very difficult for me to log in to my fantasy football team. And as a result of the difficulty trying to log into the fantasy football team, the same horrible nightmare of where I couldn't get Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson to be playing after their week off happened multiple times. At least 3 or 4 in that season where I had players who were off that were playing. So you're not going to get any points for that. And what makes matters always worse is when you see the player who should have played excelled that week, and for some reason the reverse Midas touch was totally there. When I had a player that I expected to play well on their week, they didn't. But when they were off and I couldn't get them to be off and switch with somebody else, the guy who was on my bench had a great week, while the other guy, of course, wasn't even playing. So I just lost game after game after game after game. And I ended up losing in that league pretty badly. And the people actually sent me a couple of messages saying, boy, you're really terrible at this. But of course, it wasn't completely my fault. The problem was partially the fact that I couldn't make adjustments because of having difficulty logging in and logging out. And the timing was just perfect storm of terrible. Thus, I did terrible in that league and was just ready to quit again, and eventually that's what I did. Then I went into 2022. We're going to advance a little bit more because, man, football is just a great sport. And you got to play sometime, right? And I just kept talking to players at my job at the end of 2022. Not at the end of 2022. At the beginning of 2022 season, which was no. Now I'm getting confused a little bit. It was the 2021 regular season that ended the Super Bowl in 2022. That's it. I had played and things were on the up because for some reason my fantasy football life seems to go the way that the Philadelphia Eagles regular season went last year. I started strong. I looked invincible. And then all of a sudden, I crumbled. And not only did I crumble, I completely crumbled. It was just like if you watched the old Clash of the Titans when Perseus put Medusa's head up and it turned the Kraken into stone. And then he kept holding the head until the Kraken completely fell apart and fell into the sea. That's what my fantasy sport league did. I looked great. Then I turned into a statue and was getting beat up pretty bad. And then eventually I completely crumbled and I didn't even make the playoffs. I started off winning my first 4 or 5 games, looked unstoppable, and then I lost everything else. And this is 2021-2022 season. And I was just like, no. Not going to do this. So, that was the end of that. The phone issue just made me lose my mind in 2021 season. 2022, I tried to play again, but I picked the wrong leagues. I literally tried to join 3 or 4 different leagues, and each one of those leagues that I joined, I waited to get ready for the draft. There was only 3 players. League was set for 10. Never completed the league, and as a result of that, the league folded. That was a hurt piece because I was ready to play. And everything was in place, and I was doing what I needed to do, yet the league folded because it didn't have enough players in it. Like, what? You gotta be kidding me. Not enough players, so we're gonna fold the league. And I was ready. I had my list down. I had players that I was gonna take. I was all in on the 49er defense. Needless to say, I was all in on George Kittle as my tight end. Man, I was like, I'm going to go get Christian McCaffrey because I think he's going to be the guy that's going to help me get over the top. I was looking at other quarterbacks throughout the league that I thought might have some potential. And one of the ones that seemed to have been a positive was Josh Allen. And I was like, all right, I got my players in mind. I want to go get the tight end from Atlanta. Oh, what is his name? I can't think of it right now, but he was another tight end that I wanted because I knew that everybody was going to go after Kelce because Kelce is Kelce. So I was looking for that other guy from Atlanta who was pretty good. I actually made notes and I was ready to do this. And like I said, I tried a bunch of times, and every time there wasn't enough players in the league. And thus, I gave up and said, all right, apparently it's not for me to play this year. And so, I didn't. That was that. And then the final draw was last season. 49ers get to the Super Bowl. And I was all in on their defense again. And I was like, well, Christian McCaffrey is a Niner now. And he's going to be the workhorse. I know that. So I got to take him. It looks like there's going to be some good stuff from Debo and Justin Jefferson. He was on my team. Because imagine that. The whole thing actually let me go ahead and set up a team and be part of the league. And then for some reason, nothing. Kept going back to try to log into the league and check my status and my team. But it was as if the site was gone. The whole site was gone. Like, I don't remember what site it was anymore, but all I know was a different one from the one that I had tried, and I couldn't get a league that had more than 3 people in it. So I thought maybe this would be different. No, it wasn't. The whole site just didn't work. And at that point, I knew that perhaps fantasy football was not going to be my thing anymore. And I literally have decided at that point in time, okay, you win. I'll watch, I'll enjoy, but I will not attempt to play because apparently somebody out there does not want me to play. And so, that's where I stand. No fantasy sports. It's just not what I do. And again, I just want to tell you that I mentioned a few of the names that I had over time, and I just want to mention some of the other guys that throughout my fantasy career that I was able to draft, not trade for, but draft, because of being in the right time, the right place, and still, it just wasn't good enough. I mean, I already mentioned that I had Kevin Durant. I had that fella out of Los Angeles. To make it clear, like I said, it was in the 2011, 2012 season. The guy I had was Kobe. Now, it wasn't the Kobe who was super dominant. It was slightly on the decline, but it was still Kobe, right? Right? I had Dirk Nowitzki. I had Blake Griffin in basketball. I think I said I had Kevin Durant. Notable NFL players, like I said, I had Megatron, Calvin Johnson at one point, and his quarterback, Matthew Stafford. I had a Tom Brady, one of those seasons where the internet collapsed. I had Drew Brees one year. I had Gronk. Like I said, I had George Kittle later, and the 49er defense when they went to the Super Bowl. in 2012, man, I had some good pieces, some really good pieces. I had a Raven defense at one time. I had a solid team. I really did. I really did. On a number of occasions, I had some great, great pieces. But if the league gets canceled, the internet has major disruptions, your phone is having trouble communicating with the league, you can literally have the 2000 St. Louis Rams, every single player, which broke all kinds of NFL scoring records and had a solid defense, and you're literally not going to win. You just can't win if you can't play, right? And that's pretty much where I was at. And so, to alleviate any more heartbreak, I would rather just watch the 49ers lose NFC Championship games and Super Bowls as opposed to rooting for other guys to try to make my team strong enough to miss the playoffs in fantasy football. I can't do it anymore. And that is the end of my fantasy football career. And on that note, I'm going to ring the bell on this episode and talk to you about the recipient of the Spear of the Week. Now, normally, the Spear of the Week would be an individual, but it's more than one individual because I don't understand why these people insist on turning me into the Red Hulk and creating these feelings of road rage. And yes, I did say the Red Hulk, and I like using the Red Hulk as reference because it's one thing to be a Hulk and be angry all the time, but it's another thing to be a Hulk who's angry all the time, who literally can generate fire because you're so angry. And that's where these people have me at. I understand why people pass on the right. In fact, even as I record this episode right now, in New Jersey, a young hockey player who played for the Columbus Blue Jackets was killed yesterday as I'm recording. This is August 30th. The young man was killed on 29th because somebody decided to pass on the right who was drinking. Didn't make any sense. And they snuffed out a young life who was only in New Jersey at that time, riding a bike with a friend because he was going to a friend's wedding. And now this young man's promising career and life are over because somebody thought it was a good idea to pass on the right. Seriously? That goes without saying. That person's the Spear of the Week. No doubt about it. I mean, yes, I'm a Devils fan, which means I do enjoy hockey. But it doesn't matter. It didn't have to be a professional hockey player who was riding his bike. It could have been anybody riding their bike at that time when that guy made that poor decision. Thus, he's going to find out real soon, I hope. He's going to find out what a mistake it was that he ended up in jail, because that's where he's going to end up, in jail. As I told everybody on multiple segments, don't go to jail. Well, apparently this guy wasn't listening to my segments. And unfortunately for him, that segment is over for the time being. And, well, he's going to have some stories of his own why you shouldn't go to jail. But for now, he's the Spear of the Week. Had to let that die down a little bit. And I'm going into the new segment. Like I said, during the Spirit of the Week, I have finished up with the Don't Go to Jail segment for a time being. I'm now going to go into the new segment, which is going to be my picks for the NFL's upcoming week. Now, as this episode is recording, the games that I'm going to talk about aren't going to be completed until not even the 7th of September, but the 8th of September is going to be the last game of the season. Not the season, of my picks. But that's okay, because I'll still talk to you about the next set of picks that I'm going to have on the 7th. And then we'll get into exactly how I did the week after that. So, for the first time ever, my personal picks, Phil's picks for the NFL season. I don't do this often, but this year I've decided to go ahead and do it. Thanks, Dave. I would not have even thought about this had I not thought about the fantasy football episode, so you're going to be responsible for my success or failure in this segment, either way. So, without further ado, these are my picks for week 1. I looked at the first game of the season because I hate both of these teams. As a 49ers fan, I have a personal hatred for both of these teams. Such a deep-seated, guttural hatred that can't be described with anything other than I want both teams to lose. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. One of them has to. Why do I hate these two teams so much? Well, the 49ers were undefeated, 5-0 in Super Bowls until they met the Baltimore Ravens in 2012. And then they were only a one-loss Super Bowl team until the 2019 season, and last year when the Chiefs beat the 49ers in 2 different Super Bowls. Just nauseating. And so, both of these two teams who have the wins over the 49ers in the Super Bowl play each other in week 1. Once again, I have no love for either of these teams. If it were at all possible, like I said, I would like them both to lose. But at the very least, they would tie. They can't both lose. So, thinking about it, all the hype behind the Kansas City Chiefs trying to three-peat, and the fact that the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson is just an extremely super beyond talented player, I believe that the Chiefs are not going to three-peat. I just don't see it possible. And I also don't think that the Ravens are going to get there either, because I believe that they are going to be the NFL's ultimate overachiever this season. They're going to look, not overachiever, underachiever. They're going to look invincible for a little while, and then when it gets to the most important part, they're going to fail. And here we go. I think the Chiefs are going to come down to earth a little bit, and the Ravens are going to start their rise before their fall. I believe the Ravens are going to win 21-17 on Thursday Night Football. Don't worry, Chiefs fans. You're still going to make the playoffs, and hopefully you'll lose before the AFC Championship. Next game, what I like to call the NFL's biggest mistake, taking two teams to Brazil to play a football game when they have a gang issue that has green as their major color. So the fact that the league decided to take the two teams who are primarily green, to play in that game, I think the NFL loses. As long as both teams wear white, somebody will at least be able to leave the stadium in one piece. But it's not the outcome that I would prefer, because I think the young upstart Green Bay Packers, they're getting ready for an eventual assault on the Super Bowl, but it's not quite their time yet. And the Philadelphia Eagles, again, are going to do what I think they're going to do, which is they're going to look good for a while, and then eventually they're going to come back down to earth too. And I think that they're going to win this game. The Eagles are going to beat the Packers, but it's not going to kill the Packers season. I think it's going to be an interesting game. Going to be some scoring. It's going to be a fun watch. 31-28 Eagles. Now here comes a game that I'm going to call my Madden surprise. Turns out that while I played Madden, I went through an entire season, and by the time that this is over with, I'll have gone through 2. And J.J. McCarthy, on Madden at least, looks like the real deal. I want to know if their prediction is correct. I think that Minnesota has themselves a quarterback for the next 10 years if Madden has anything to say about it. Kid looks good. And I think the Giants probably are looking to find a new quarterback, even though they've paid this guy a mint in order to be their quarterback. He's not the guy. Minnesota 24, Giants 14. David. Your Commanders are my upset. And it's going to be very interesting because I think that they also have a nice young quarterback. And they've got some pieces on the offense. And their defense, I think we're going to find out some interesting things. Do I think that they're the worst team in the NFC East? No. Do I think that they could be the second best team in the NFC East? I'm not entirely sure, but I think that people are going to sleep on them a little too much. And I think it's going to start with this playoff team that beat the Eagles. I think that Tampa Bay is going to overlook the Commanders. And I think that a field goal is going to be the difference. Commanders 20, Tampa Bay 17. Now, my favorite game of the week. The Jets and my boys, the 49ers. Am I being biased? A little bit. But my bias has justification now. What is the justification to my bias? Well, the 49ers and Aaron Rodgers have a unique history since Alex Smith was picked first overall in 2005, and the California guy, Aaron Rodgers, kind of took that personally. Ever since then, he's played the 49ers a bunch of times, and he's played them different than he's played other teams. Don't get me wrong, he's played to win against everybody he's played, but he's played to not just win, but to embarrass the 49ers, and he puts extra pressure on himself against the 49ers. Thus, there have been plenty of opportunities for him to beat the 49ers, but he just hasn't been able to do it because he just tries too hard and has been taken down by the 49ers a number of times over this lifetime. And I believe that the Jets' opportunity isn't going to be any different. He's got a solid team just like he's had with Green Bay. And I think he's going to go in there thinking, I'm going to show these 49ers up. And it's not going to happen again. I believe that Aaron Rodgers is going to lose to the 49ers again. However, I have two scores for this game. Somewhat of a joke, actually. As everybody knows, Aaron Rodgers played one set of downs before he tore his Achilles. And it happens to be that the 49ers have the guy who made the hit that tore Aaron Rodgers' Achilles last year. So, I have two scores. The first score is if Aaron Rodgers' Achilles and his body holds up and Leonard doesn't kill him, 49ers will win the game 23-14. Not overblown. Decent score. Keep themselves out in front. 23-14 49ers. But if somehow Aaron Rodgers falls again and cannot get up and is out of the game, well, that's it for the Jets. And it's going to be 35-10 blowout 49ers. And those are my picks. We'll find out how I do in a week or two. Now, we're coming to the end of the show. This is my favorite but bittersweet moment because I enjoy doing these shows and I don't necessarily want them to come to an end, but as they say, every good thing must come to an end after a while. You can check out my Instagram at PhilipHenderson5102. You're going to be able to listen to this and other videos that I'm going to be posting on my YouTube channel at Phil the Lip on YouTube. Subscribe. The Facebook channel, Facebook page, the Lip Facebook page. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Join us. There's always room for one more person on the Lip Facebook group. Always room for one more person. Now, I've got to tell you that it's time for the words of wisdom. And these words of wisdom are extremely, extremely important because if I'm talking to you about fantasy football and football season in general, one thing that people tend to do during the football season is bet on games. One of the worst days for betting and, or as I like to say, not just betting, but come to Jesus moments because they lose their shirt betting is the Super Bowl. Be careful. The words of wisdom are be careful. If you're going to bet responsibly. And if you feel like you have a problem, get help for it. Because that 3-hour contest shouldn't deprive you of your entire life savings. Get help if you need it. Be responsible. And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for listening and remind everybody that my name is Phil and you've just listened to The Lip.